Room for Rent by Hunan Forever. I found the listing online. Furnished basement room for rent. Private entrance. $400 a month. No pets, no questions. It was sketchy, but I was desperate. I just lost my job, and my savings were circling the drain. The landlord was a tall, thin man who didn't smile. He handed me a key, told me the rules. Stay in my room after 9 p.m. Don't go upstairs. Never look through the keyhole. I laughed. He didn't. People think they want to know. They don't. I should have walked away. Instead, I moved in. The first night was uneventful, except for the sound of footsteps above me. Constant pacing, all night. Fast, then slow, then faster again, like someone running in circles. On the third night, I woke up to scraping. Not footsteps, nails dragging across the ceiling. I went upstairs despite the rules. The hallway was pitch black, every door shut, except one at the far end. Open a crack. Soft, wet breathing echoed from it. I turned back. The next morning, the landlord stood at my door. "You went up," he said. Not angry, sad. I didn't go in, I told him. Doesn't matter. It saw you. That night, the pacing turned into thumping. Something slamming against the floor above. I stuffed towels under my door, turned the TV up, and prayed for daylight. At 3:12 a.m., the power died. Silence. Then, knocking. Not on the front door. On my bedroom door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then a voice, soft and gurgling. "Let me in. I want to see who you are." I stayed frozen until morning. When the sun rose, the door was wide open. The landlord was gone. His car, his things, all of it. I called the police. They searched the house. Only one thing was strange, they said. There's no upstairs. The blueprint showed a 1-story home, no second floor, no staircase. They thought I was crazy. But last night, I found the keyhole he warned me about. In the hallway, hidden behind a false panel. My hands were shaking. I looked. All I saw was an eye, looking back. Not human, too wide, all pupil. Then it whispered, "Found you." Now I hear footsteps again, only this time, they're below me. Hello, X. I have something that might be of interest to you. It concerns what my team and I found under the Great Sphinx in the Egyptian city of Giza. I know the very first question you'll ask is why we would ever go searching underneath a place like that and for what possible purpose. I'll keep it brief for you. Have you ever heard of an American author by the name of John Anthony West? Did you know that during the early 90s, he and a team of archaeologists carried out a series of seismological and geological tests around the Great Sphinx? The results of his tests caught everyone's attention, ours especially. His tests revealed the existence of unexplored tunnels in the bedrock beneath the monument. His team was subsequently thrown out of the site by Egyptian authorities, and we got involved around this time. Who we are is of no importance, at least not to you anyway. The only thing I will mention is the obvious. We are a group with some sort of connection to the United States government, and were assigned this task due to a certain degree of knowledge and expertise that we possess. Green text will begin from here in order to make the events that happened a little easier to follow. Received our mission and arrived in Giza during the summer of 1995, tasked with excavation and transport by the local government, told to recover whatever we possibly could from the tunnels beneath the Sphinx by the US government. Local officials feigned ignorance at the possibility of tunnels or valuables underneath the Sphinx. Have an assistant with me assigned to the task, let's call him Josh. Josh is complaining about a lack of information, is seriously worried about being sent in blind and the dangers that we might encounter. I tell him to calm down, tell him the mission will go smoothly and that there's probably some gems or treasure down there at most. Arrive at the monolith. Can see the pyramids of Giza just beyond it, partially covered by a thick layer of fog and dust. I pull out a cigarette before we head in and ask Josh if he's shitting himself yet. Tells me he has a bad feeling about the mission, but I dismiss it once again. Thinks that the mission can't be as straightforward as it seems otherwise. Why hire us? Just shrug at him. Money is money. I don't care what we have to do, it's all the same to me. Senior Size Mall just runs over to us and tells us that we're finally good to go. They've managed to break through. Josh asks him if they managed to take a look down below. Tell us he caught a glimpse of something and that the chamber seemed empty. Empty? Ask him what he means. Tells me they didn't see anything down there at all. No urns, no gold, no valuables, just 4 walls. What the fuck? At least the job will be easy. Ask him if he thinks someone beat us to it and took everything before we could get there. Tells me it's unlikely, but stranger things have happened. I just nod and say that we better get it over with. We suited up in full hazmat suits just in case and made our way over to the base of the Sphinx. We're also equipped with an industrial flashlight each. I approached the gaping drill hole near the statue's right paw. I got down into a sitting position and then began climbing down using a rope ladder. Josh is close behind me. Immediately hit a wall of darkness. My feet hit the ground and I turned on my flashlight as fast as possible. It was exactly as he said. Fucking empty. I was just standing in the middle of this vast cavern-like space with nothing of value at all to be seen. The place was quite large, and the hollowness of the subterranean space amplified every movement and made them seem incredibly strange and eerie. There was a steady stream of sand trickling from a small crack in the ceiling. I decided it was best not to linger and finish our job as quickly as possible. I told Josh to move his ass and get into gear. As I explored further in, we noticed a lot of iconography on the walls that was worn heavily by the passage of time. The usual Egyptian stuff, depictions of Ra, the Eye of Horus, even portrayals of Osiris and Thoth were all across the walls. It looked like they were telling a story of some kind. Anubis emblazoned across the wall, judging the souls of the dead with displays of all sorts of monsters along the width of it too. Josh starts to speak up to get my attention. Tells me to come look. Josh is just standing there with his flashlight raised towards a wall at the far end of the chamber. On the wall there was another icon, a god I had never seen before in my life. Below it was the lid of a sarcophagus. It was standing upright against the wall and looked to be embedded with the sandstone itself. Perhaps this place was a tomb. Decided to go over and check out the find. Wasn't particularly worried about anything. It was likely empty anyway, and I was just checking to be sure. Started to notice more details once I got closer to it. The design of the coffin was not like a typical Egyptian one that you'd see in a history book at all. The design of the coffin was human in the face, but it had feline-shaped paws folded over its body. The design really irked me for some reason, and I could not figure out why at all. It seemed to be somewhat similar to the iconography that it was placed underneath, but I couldn't say for sure whether they were the same. If it was a coincidence, it was definitely a strange one. I placed my gloved hand over the lid and leaned in closer to inspect the details. The wall had molded itself around the coffin. It was fit around it like a cast. Josh speaks up again. He asked me what I'm doing. I replied back sarcastically, and he told me to be careful, that he was worried. I started telling him to go home if he was going to be such a coward. Just as I finished my sentence, I felt a surge of pain shooting through my head. I almost bit my tongue, it hurt so bad. It felt as if someone had driven a dagger deep into my brain and just kept pushing and pushing it. The pain just kept amplifying until it was overwhelming. I stepped back, fully consumed by the pain that was shooting throughout my body. I started clawing at my hazmat suit in vain, hoping that tearing it off might relieve some of the pain. I couldn't escape it no matter what I did. I wish I died. That is how unbearable the pain was. I lost my balance completely and hit the ground, hard. I could hear the slow motion vibrations on the ground, so I assumed Josh rushed over to me. All I could do was squirm on the ground and hope for it to go away. The last thing I saw was the outline of Josh as my vision started to fade to black. He tried to reach out to me, but I couldn't respond no matter how hard I tried. He picked up my radio and was frantically trying to contact someone. I woke up, kind of. I woke up to pure blackness. Like I felt conscious and awake, but I could only see pure black. Time seemed to shift for me once I woke up. I couldn't tell how much time had passed or what was going on. All I had was infinite blackness. It was barren and lifeless with no sound at all. It was maddening. The seconds just seemed to go on forever as my vision drifted in and out of focus until I finally saw my saving grace. I could see a light in the distance. It wasn't just one light, there was a multitude of them. They seemed to be as bright as stars in the night sky, except they were incredibly close to me. I didn't realize it until that moment when I noticed their gleam reflecting back off of it. I was suddenly standing in water, a massive expanse of knee-deep water, seemingly out of nowhere. I looked down back at myself again just to confirm that I was really there and actually real. I needed to know whether I was hallucinating or not. I was also completely fucking nude for no reason. There were waves of warm water hitting my thighs and my entire body relentlessly. My moment of respite only lasted for a moment before I was thrown back into action once again. It was a voice here with me in whatever this place was. It wasn't Josh. It was a stranger. No one from the site or the medical team. He was old, incredibly old. His face was covered with an array of scars and wrinkles that combined together. It was the same height as me, maybe even slightly taller. It was hard to tell at the same time due to the haziness of my mind and the deception of the water. His body was incredibly built. He had the body of an athlete in his prime and showed no wear and tear at all. He was wearing some strange clothes, a tunic I think it looked like, pure white. The most striking thing about his appearance, though, was the wolf pelt that hung around his neck that he wore like a scarf. The animal's skull sat atop of his shoulders like he was fucking Hercules and had just slain the beast himself. I finally managed to stutter out some words and ask him who the fuck he was and what he was doing in the cordoned off dig site. There was absolutely no way he should have been able to get down there with all these workers, unless he'd been down here before we got there. The old man just sighed and stared deep into my soul. Every move he made had me on edge. He told me that I'd invaded his temple, ransacked it, and made a mockery of him by not knowing his name. I just stood there speechless. It was like I was getting scolded by my mom and dad. For some reason, I felt like I should apologize even though I had no idea what I had done wrong. He cut me off before I could speak though. He told me his name, but I didn't really know how to pronounce it. I think he said something like, Wapa, Wawet? But I've never heard of that before. He told me his brother was the famous one. I asked him where I was, but he just asked me where I thought I was. I only had a vague idea that I hoped was wrong. I asked him if I was dead. He told me no. He told me that the afterlife was only for the deserving. He brought his hands out from behind his back and made a twirling motion with his finger that forced me to turn around against my will. He told me to watch carefully and study what he was going to show me. He told me it was my doing. I could only watch in horror as I saw something towering in the distance, a Titanic-sized figure. He was showing me a creature of impossible stature, probably the size of a city. It was so large that my brain could not comprehend it properly. Its sheer size just made my brain hurt. There were bronze chains cutting into the creature's hide, and metal rods too. Its paws were nailed to a platform and stopped it from moving. Its fur was like a forest along its body. I can't even begin to describe its face. Just dwelling on its image, looking at it, it made my brain spiral and turn straight into flight mode. Its existence was like a black hole to my mind. The man started to speak again, asking me what I thought of the creature. Again, he cut me off before I could respond, describing the creature as beautiful. He told me that the creature had been the same since he first encountered it. He still withers and grows old, but the creature never ages. I tried to cover my eyes, but my hands were trembling too much to be able to move them. It was then, looking down at my shaking hands, that I noticed that the water I stood in was not actually water. It had changed color. The water was a murky red. I asked if I was the blood of the creature. I asked how it could still be alive if it had lost so much blood, but all he did was shush me. He told me that I asked too many questions, that all I do is ask and give nothing in return. I tried to ask another question, but before I could, one of the chains holding down the beast snapped suddenly. Both pieces of the chain fell to the ground and caused the entire place to shake, which nearly knocked me off my feet and into the liquid I was stood in. One by one, each shackle began to snap off and fall to the ground. The sight was horrifying. "It is going to devour all of you," was the only word that the man said. He said it so casually, like it was no big deal at all. I asked him what was going to happen, if he could kill it, if we could kill it. He told me he already had. Again and again. A countless number of times. He told me that the creature always comes back each time, stronger than ever, and that it grows weaker and weaker. That's what this place was for. It was a tomb trapping the creature so that when he finally lost the creature, it still couldn't make its way out. He told us that we ruined that when we drilled our holes and stepped foot into this place. He showed me more images. Images of the sarcophagus we had found being loaded onto a truck to take back to the US for study. It had not been yet opened. I asked the man what I needed to do. There was something like a white flash, and the next thing I knew, I was awake again. For real this time. I was lying in my tent, sprawled out completely with Josh pacing nervously beside me. He was relieved to see me conscious again. I went into a frenzy, explained that the sarcophagus needed to be put back this instant, and that I would explain after I made a full report back to base. He was completely shocked at this sudden reaction, but he and the rest of the workmen on the site complied without any resistance. I made a full, in-depth report the first second I could. I was expecting to be laughed out of my role and dealt with accordingly, but nothing of the sort happened. I was given a strict set of orders which I followed to the letter, and within 12 hours a team was dispatched to us. Another team dropped by, one I had never seen or heard of before, and all of the workmen, and me, and Josh were escorted off-site. We were sent back home and deployed to another mission, and I never heard anything about the sarcophagus again. I couldn't exactly just ask about something confidential like that. Josh was transferred shortly afterward. He was relatively new, so it didn't shock me all that much. Never heard from him again after that. I couldn't help but wonder where he ended up. I couldn't help but wonder what they did with the sarcophagus, or whether they ever believed me and opened it up anyway. I suppose the world hasn't ended yet, so there's that at least. Maybe they found another way to contain it, or maybe they found some other secrets. Sorry that I don't really have any more information other than that X. This is a difficult story to recall for me, and all felt way too real. I guess it's possible that I just imagined it all, but that wouldn't explain why our superiors acted so hastily. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever find any answers. I stayed in my role for a few more years after that, but I became so jaded quite quickly and opted to step into a less intensive role before eventually retiring. I have a lot more experiences to tell you about, but they mostly just involve exploring catacombs for artifacts and killing certain targets, which I might have to heavily censor just in case. Any questions, I'll try my best to answer. Someone plays carnival music in our yard late at night. Originally posted to r/creepy encounters. And the post reads as follows. This is going to sound bizarre and made up, but I swear on my left that this happened and there are several witnesses. Even if I can't explain why someone would do this, I am fairly positive this isn't anything paranormal. I live quite a distance off the road in an unremarkable house on private property. My neighbors are all older family members who go to bed extremely early and whose children are already grown and out of the house. In summary, there are no mischief makers to play pranks on us here. A few months ago, my mother and I stayed up late one evening, watching television together. Around 3 a.m., I turned the television off and decided to go to bed. As I was leaving the room, I began to hear what sounded like carnival music playing outside of my house in the front yard. It was loud and close. My mother heard it too, and immediately went to the window to investigate. She couldn't see anything but darkness. Everyone else was either asleep for the night or away on vacation. The lights were off in all their houses, and none of them would be caught dead listening to anything but country music anyway. We were miles from the nearest city, so it wasn't the product of noise pollution. You can hear when a car is pulled up in the yard, but there was no sound of a car. The silence where we live is usually deafening. all you can hear is the ringing in your ears. Where did this song come from? Who was playing it? And why? I was very unsettled by the idea of a stranger in our yard playing carnival music. As such, suggests malicious intent. My father and uncle later mentioned that 20 years ago, when my parents first moved in, the electrician had come to install a ceiling light and stopped in the middle of his work, saying he could hear Pink Floyd playing in the front yard. Neither my father nor uncle could hear it. My father is a bit hard of hearing, and my uncle is much older, so they laughed it off and thought the man was insane. But the electrician was freaked out. He kept opening the door and trying to find the source of the noise to no avail. Then it hit me. The song I had heard that night was Pink Floyd's Surus Minor, the part that sounds like carnival music. I played the song for my mother, and she began freaking out saying, yes, that's what I heard. Who the hell sits in my yard at night and 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere playing the same song, which isn't even a popular song, 20 years later with no car? Where did they come from? They would have had to walk several miles to get out here. Aside from this, the only other strange thing we experience that would suggest an intruder, we feel and hear knocking on the living room window late at night around the same hour. Sometimes so intense that the entire wall of the house is rattled and it sends the couch against it into a reclining position. There are no nearby trees to tap the glass, and no animal except a human could possibly reach it. Fortunately, this has stopped over the last few weeks. Update 1. Several months ago, I posted about my experience with an unwelcome visitor who knocks on our windows late at night. If you'd like to read that post first, here's the link to the original. This is an update on the situation, as many people have requested. Shortly after my first post, I had almost convinced myself our intruder was gone when, as I was staying up in the early hours of the morning to finish a bit of homework, I heard a noise in the yard just outside my bedroom. I sat there listening, but could only detect something like machinery. It was not a sound that I recognized. I couldn't imagine what was causing the noise unless the air conditioner was misbehaving. But once it had quieted down, I finished working and went to sleep. About 2 nights later, I heard loud grinding around the same hour, but again, could not determine the source, however alarming the volume was. The following morning, my father discovered someone had sabotaged our air conditioning unit by first removing a piece of its inner machinery and later throwing it into the fan while it was spinning, effectively destroying its blades and a few other pieces. The part had presumably been taken the first time I was disturbed by activity in the yard and thrown back in the second time. I noticed it only because the outdoor unit is mounted against my bedroom. We thought initially that the piece, and forgive me for my ambiguous language, as I'm not technology savvy, had loosened by itself and broken down. But we called a repairman, who begged to differ. He was surprised by the degree of damage and insisted he had never seen it happen naturally, suspecting someone had removed several screws and tampered with the unit. He thought my father had attempted to work on it and cause the trouble, but of course, he had not. A few days after the damaged parts had been fully replaced, my mother was leaving for a doctor's appointment when she began yelling and called the family into the yard. Our electric box was opened in the night and left ajar as if someone had been trying to find a wire to cut our electricity or disable a suspected indoor security system. We had been outside several times since the repairman finished the work, and we are certain he closed the electrical box, if he ever even opened it. We have weathered several severe hurricanes here, and winds are not strong enough to open our electric box. A person had to have done it. Weeks passed without incident, my parents opting to overlook these concerning happenings. My father tried to explain the air conditioner as a freak occurrence. They purchased a new gun and did little else. Towards the beginning of the summer, my grandfather mentioned that, a couple weeks prior, when we were on vacation, he'd seen a red Jeep drive the lengthy distance from the road through our private property to our house in broad daylight. He didn't recognize the driver, but approached and questioned him. The man claimed he was looking for a woman that lived in a trailer. The person he claimed he was looking for had the name of a family friend that lives hours away from us. The man was behaving strangely, and my grandfather was not convinced by his story. He ordered him to leave immediately. Our family that lives around us on the farm is reinforcing their doors, installing extra locks, and keeping their children out of their yards until we find out what's going on. They won't even let them walk home from the bus stop anymore. I had stopped worrying over it as much because I've been preoccupied with moving to a new state, but the old knocking returned this evening at 10 p.m. My parents were watching television together when they heard it. They turned on the porch light and peered at the peephole of the back door to investigate, but saw no one. At 3 a.m., I was awake watching television when it sounded as if someone forcefully punched the glass of the usual exposed window. I covered it with a blanket as I always do. An hour after I covered the window, I began to hear loud noises from our back door porch off of the kitchen, as if someone had stepped onto it. However, it was briefly lived. They apparently weren't walking around, but simply standing there. About 10 minutes after, I heard yet more knocking, except this time, it wasn't on the exposed living room window, but further down the wall the window was on, next to the couch. It was 3 knocks, forceful enough to rattle the wall a bit, but not so much the couch moved. This is more alarming because it suggests the trespasser lingers here for several hours at a time, posing many questions. Are we being watched for an opportunity to force entry? Hasn't the opportunity already arisen in the past and they never took it? Are we being stalked? Do they gather here to drink and get high on the property and then decide in their stupor it'll be funny to antagonize us? Why is it only our house that is targeted and not the other houses on the farm? Why do they walk several miles to come here? Their behavior is escalating. Will they eventually take things further? I woke my mother and we sat awake together until the sun rose to keep watch. We compiled a list of happenings here that suggest our trespasser visits more frequently than they knock, despite no one in the family smoking and anyone who does smoke living too far away for us to smell it. We often deal with the strong scent of a cigarette around windows or the front and back doors of the house. This happens at our bedroom windows with alarming regularity. Other times, it's strange cologne or a chemical stench, like a fresh perm. We of course remembered how my aunt's dogs will bark intensely at odd hours of the night, like they do when a stranger visits, and the motion detecting yard light has previously come on when no one is home at my grandfather's. My mother and I are going to walk around the perimeter of the house in the morning to look for cigarette butts, and we'll try convincing my father we at least need security cameras outside, even though I think we should involve the police at this point. He's been too indifferent to everything that has happened, and it makes it challenging to be proactive about our safety. And then, before we get into the next update, there was a few interesting comments on this second update. Some commenters said, I work closely with law enforcement. You might be dealing with crystal heads, and I know it's annoying I can't say the real word, but you understand what I'm saying if I say crystal with drug. And then she continues, based on the information presented in both posts, starting with cigarette/chemical smell. You mentioned a strong, fresh perm aroma. That smell is most likely crystal. It might also smell like sweet burning plastic. As for the cigarette smell, crystal addicts are notorious chain smokers. Pink Floyd track. If it's constantly on repeat, then it might be someone who needs a constant familiar sound. Crystal causes visual and auditory hallucinations that leads to severe paranoia and psychosis, which might be why they keep playing that song. Next, sketchy dude in the red Jeep. Usually, people casing a home for burglary will obtain some information about family, i.e. names of distant family members/friends, as an excuse if ever questioned. In your post, you mentioned that the opportunity for burglary has risen and not ceased, suggesting that they're watching and waiting but not interested in regular theft items, for example, money, jewelry, iPads, TVs, leading me to broken AC unit. Sabotage would be anyone's first guess, but most likely they would be looking for copper. Depending on your AC unit, some higher end units actually have gold pieces instead of copper. However, both are valuable for resale. Tampered electrical box. Some electrical boxes have diagrams and schematics of the wiring and where it leads to. Again, copper wiring is pretty valuable. Unexplained knocking. Could be coming from underneath your home or roof if these people are in fact trying to steal copper, but you would have noticed that by now. But they might be hiding something on your property, which would explain the knocking by either forcefully inserting/retrieving from hiding spot. Lastly, no sounds of vehicles approaching. You suggested they walked, which might not be too far. My theory, these people are more than likely cooking crystal somewhere off of your property, possibly in an RV like Breaking Bad, or more likely in the trunk of a car. Your home might be the closest structure to their cook site. They possibly started entering your property to steal water from your garden hose, but their activities escalated because there was no apparent sign that you improved your home security. Again, this is just a theory based on the information presented in both posts. A very interesting theory by the commenter and a well-written post, and then the OP responds to this saying, "This is an almost perfect explanation. Thank you so much. While there aren't a ton of places to have an entire crystal lab on the property, suggesting it's an offsite, there are many places where things could be hidden, including under our house. The crawl space is accessible from the outside. We distinctly hear the window receive an impact, though, and today as I walked around the perimeter of the house, I discovered that the netting on the window, and no others, has a huge rip in it from something hitting it. My dad claims it has been that way since I was in junior high, so the knocking itself may have been going on for a lot longer than originally thought. No one stayed up late enough to really notice it, though until I became an adult. Additionally, we know that druggies used to get high in the fields a few miles away, because one wandered here while high on crack when I was very little and asked to use our phone. I'm not sure if that's related or not because the man is now in prison for assault, but we know nothing of the friends he was with. In your professional opinion, should we call the police? I don't think we can prove that a crime has been committed yet, with the exception of the air conditioner tampering a few months ago. But your ideas sound so spot on that I'm very concerned something worse is bound to happen. I'd award you gold, but silver was all I had." And then the commenter comments and replies to the OP saying, "You're far too kind to give me silver. You humble me. You are absolutely correct. A crime technically has not been committed. The most the authorities will do at this point is recommended you get security cameras installed, which is a good idea. Ring doorbells for both the front and back doors. However, that's simply to prove anything wrongdoing. I recommend you get motion detected floodlights along with the cameras. Another theory just came to mind. They are possibly stealing/using your electricity to power their cook sites, which explains the tampered electrical box more. These people might not be going anywhere unless caught or scared off. Buy a new lock for the electrical box and chain it closed as well. Some say a large dog will make any trespasser second guess themselves, and as a large dog owner, I agree it works. But Stinky is a part of the family, so I wouldn't put him in any danger I wouldn't face myself. But discharged ammunition rounds scattered on the property is my personal choice for intimidating trespassers. Also, familiarize yourself with the firearms in your home, storage, accessibility, reloading, and aiming. I read a comment suggesting a booby trap. I do not endorse such a method, but a bear trap placed in the inside of your crawl space underneath your house is not considered a booby trap, especially if the yard is well lit, hence the floodlights. I also read your concern of a trespasser suing if harmed on your property, which to an extent is true. Fortunately, if the trespasser is harmed in your crawl space, is easier to prove malintent. Simply enough, they are not a repairman, and there's no reason a repairman would be working at that hour and unannounced. You need to show that you're not afraid, and if any does decide to trespass/tamper, it won't be easy. And then the OP replies to this saying, "The motion detecting light is a really good idea. The one at my grandfather's goes off when no one is supposed to be home. Someone stealing our electricity also makes sense. I'm still wary about placing booby traps because my aunt lets the one well-behaved dog she has visit during the day, and I don't know if she climbs under the house sometimes. I wouldn't want her to get hurt. I'd also worry about the toddler that lives on the farm getting away from his mother and climbing up under the house if they were outside together. And yeah, I would agree with the OP. I don't think placing booby traps is the best idea, but cameras and the floodlights, probably a good idea. And that was a lengthy comment section. So let's get into the update 2. I've previously made 2 posts about a person that visits our yard late at night in the early hours of the morning to harass us. They stand on the porch, tamper with our outside appliances, beat on the windows, break into our electric box, and repeatedly play an obscure song by Pink Floyd called Cirrus Minor. This has been going on now since before I was born. I am currently 21 years old. This is the resolution to that situation. We believe the culprit has been apprehended and arrested. If you'd like to read my previous posts about this experience, here they are in chronological order. Despite the insistence of myself and other Redditors, my parents never installed security cameras. My father remained resistant to the idea, most likely because he wasn't willing to admit that something was amiss. In the beginning, he complained about the cost, the possibility of hackers, and the difficulties with mounting a camera. He eventually promised to borrow someone's trail camera, but he never broached the subject with them. I moved to another state, and the need for the camera was no longer at the forefront of my mind. But when I remembered and received my new debit card after some unfortunate identity theft, I offered to pay for one. I told my father that I would personally buy a camera or 2 and have them delivered. Only then did he confess that he was afraid of seeing something spooky on it. He had the childlike idea that if he never saw anything happening, the problem would resolve itself. Despite all odds, the problem did resolve it. Not long after I moved out, my grandfather, who lives in a separate house on the same farm, came home to find police cars in his driveway. An officer approached him and asked if he owned another house on the farm, and he needed to speak to the landlord about his tenants. The house in question is occupied by a late relative's widow, who has a lifetime estate. My grandfather explained that the property is a part of the farm, which is owned collectively by him and his daughters. Because of this, he was permitted knowledge of what happened there. The officer explained everything. Apparently, the widow, who is quite old and infirm, used the death of my relative as an excuse to move in her chronically unemployed, drug-addicted family, among them her daughter, her son-in-law, her son-in-law's brother, and her nephew, because they don't own their own separate cars, and we seldom visit the widow. She stinks and is generally unlikable, so we social distance around her before the pandemic ever even began. This transition went undetected. Shortly before my grandfather had returned home that day, the police responded to a 911 call from the widow. Her nephew is apparently involved in a gang and has violent tendencies. Some conflict arose in the household, probably related to how many drug addicts were stuffed together under a single roof for 24 hours a day. All we were told is that the nephew was becoming violent. When the police arrived, they realized there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. He was wanted for, guess what guys, making crystal, which interestingly, commenters on my last post blamed for the stench we had been smelling, and we went over that, and for assault. The nephew was hiding from the law at the widow's house. This is the reason his presence was concealed from us on the rare occasions that the widow was outside her home and we spoke. He was removed from the home and arrested by the officers. Ever since then, there has been no strong chemical odor outside and no knocking on the window late at night. We suspect he was aware of this farm long before moving in, and it was his go-to spot for recreational substance use. The widow is around 80 years old and had her first child at approximately 13 with her first spouse. So her nephew is elderly himself and would have likely been doing substances and playing his Pink Floyd music here 21 years ago too. We're thinking he would occasionally spend the night at the widow's house over the years and walk towards the fields near us to do substances. It makes sense since we never heard a car accompanying the knocking noises because he doesn't own a car, and the house is not far since it's a part of the farm. The only incident that remains unexplained is the man who drove to our house when we weren't home and asked my grandfather about a family friend that lives hours away. I wonder if they were looking for the crystal head and were told to give some sort of code to make sure he was at the right house. The name could have just been a coincidence. I had an internet incident a few months ago that suggested some stalker-ish activity, but that is probably unrelated. I apologize for updating you all so late. I'm satisfied with this explanation since there's been no repeat occurrences after his arrest. And wow, that was a 21-year story that was not really solved. I mean, not a 21-year long Reddit post, but still, that guy has been making crystal around that house for 21 years. Crazy, crazy story and super creepy. I mean, it started off with just hearing the circus music, and yeah, that was creepy in and of itself. But then someone knocking on the windows, that always freaks me out, and all these other things. That was a crazy story. Good job on the commenter who guessed it was a guy making crystal. Crazy guess, but good online detective work. And yeah, I really enjoyed that story and that thread. It was unsettling, but luckily it's resolved, and hopefully that guy doesn't come crawling back making crystal under the house once again. But we'll have to see. From a user named RW Bingham, who shared a chilling story about one of the most infamous serial killers in history, Ted Bundy. Bundy was the definition of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Smart, charming, and seemingly harmless, he lured his victims in with a false sense of security. Over the course of the 1970s, he killed at least 30 women across multiple states. His method was terrifyingly simple. He would approach his victims in public, often pretending to be injured or in need of help, and then abduct him. Once in his control, Bundy would rape and kill his victims, sometimes revisiting their bodies for hours or days. His crimes were horrifying, but it was his ability to blend in and manipulate others that made him even more dangerous. After being arrested in 1975, Bundy managed to escape twice and continue his killing spree until his final capture in 1978. He was executed in 1989. Around 10 years ago, a thread was posted in r/ask Reddit. Serious, what is the creepiest bone-chilling story you know that claims to be true? Under the post, a person with the username AlisaTG replied by saying, "This post from RW Bingham." Here's what it said. It was near Halloween time when my friend and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date. And around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area, so the two drive up to the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking under the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late, he ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to getting caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. Well, yeah, I'd say that they got really lucky that day, because if there's one thing I've learned from serial killer documentaries, it's that these guys don't leave proof or witnesses. Ever. There's something seriously wrong with my family's new home. I knew something was off the moment I saw the place. It turned out to be worse than I could have possibly imagined. I first laid eyes on the house after my parents had closed the deal. We'd been driving through a fancy neighborhood that our rusty Honda CR-V felt out of place in. After a final turn, the house appeared at the end of a lane, far enough away from the other homes to feel somehow separate from the rest of the community. It was tall and old, yet well kept, earning a vintage boldness that I appreciated. Nestled into an evergreen wood, it seemed like the last bit of civilization before a wilderness that stretched ever on. "That is our new house?" I gasped, leaning forward to poke my head between the front seats. Taken by the majesty of it, I paid little mind to the locals who stared at us as we passed. My dad chuckled heartily. "It is, Ari." "How?" I was only 17, but old enough to know that we couldn't have afforded such a place. "It was a steal," my mom chirped, glancing at my father. "We got so lucky. It's been how long, dear, that we've been house hunting?" 2 years, my dad sighed. "Well, patience does pay off," my mom went on, gesturing at the house. "Wait long enough and search hard enough and you might just strike gold. Smelly gold, that is," added my dad with another chortle. I nodded absently, gawping at the building. I didn't need any better explanation. I was in no position to complain. That monument at the end of the lane was to be my new home. "I want my own room," exclaimed my younger sister, Lena. My younger brother, Kai, pouted a little at that. She was 8 and he was 4. They'd been sharing a room since Kai was old enough to be away from our parents. "You'll have just that, honey," answered my mom. Lina squealed in excitement, grinning ear to ear. She couldn't have known that she'd soon come to regret this, and never wish to sleep alone again in her life. Things were fine for the first few days, as you'd expect. The interior of the house was as old and proud as its exterior, and twice as spacious as our former place. It was smelly, though, as my dad had mentioned. The sour reek that seemed to permeate the place was the main reason we got such a discount, my mom explained. Our dogs, Chiefy and Miss Bear, loved it, even with their extra sensitive nose. They were running up and down the halls, barking all day long, unbothered by the stink. They left plenty of dirt on the floors, drawing complaints from my parents. It was unsettling when the dogs growled at the house come nighttime, but that was easily explained as the old building moaned and creaked plenty when the winds of the wilderness pushed against it. The doggos would need a week to adjust. That was all. The first thing that really rubbed me wrong was the way Kai was talking to himself in his room. My brother and sister were in their bedrooms on either side of my own, and it was easy enough to hear them through the old woodwork. Lina was singing along to the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack on one side. That was nothing new. But on the other side, my typically quiet little brother was mumbling, and I couldn't hear anyone else with him. I didn't think much of it at first, but this behavior continued, and he'd even be talking to himself around the house. My mom was the one to confront him about it. "Hi, sweetie. What are you saying? Are you talking to yourself?" Kai looked up at her, confused. "No, Mommy. I'm talking to my friend." "Oh, creepy," I thought, smirking a little. My mother shot a strange glance at my dad, one that meant more than I could have known, then turned back to Kai. "Well, who's your friend, Kai?" He shrugged, eyes fixed on the toy blocks he was stacking on the carpet. "I don't know." My parents whispered to one another for a while after this, deliberating, and seemed to ultimately decide that it was okay for a boy of 4 to have an imaginary friend. Fair enough, I supposed, and we carried on. A week passed, then 2, and still the dogs would not settle when it came to the house's creaking. They would growl and even bark far too often throughout the night. What really got to me was the time Miss Bear was sleeping at the foot of my bed and started growling, seemingly at nothing. I couldn't hear any creaking. It wasn't a windy night, but she was growling at the wall of my room, the one shared with Kai. "Enough," I hissed. Miss Bear looked at me for a moment, then back at the wall, and let out a sharp bark. I opened my mouth to protest, but abruptly she yelped, backing away, tail between her legs. Her sudden fear shot my own feeling of, ew, creepy, right up to, oh fuck, oh god, oh hell no. "What is it, girl?" I whispered. Miss Bear hackles were raised, her tail still between her legs. She maintained a low growl, then all at once, she shot out of my room, veering towards Kai's door. I jumped out of bed and followed her into my brother's room. Kai was awake. He was sitting on his bed, facing our shared wall. "It's okay," he said to our dog. "It was just my friend." I looked from Kai to the dogs. Chiefy had come as well to see what the fuss was about, then threw my hands up and left. It was okay for a boy of 4 to have an imaginary friend, right? The next day, on a whim, I took a closer look at the wall my brother and I shared. I swung the curtains open to let in the daylight, then ran my hand over the wooden planks and the ivory paint that covered them. I couldn't sense anything off. There were a couple of paintings hanging on the wall, a dresser pushed up against it, and an air intake vent at its base. Unsatisfied, I decided to lay my shoulder into the dresser and push it away from the wall. The cool draft from the air vent caused goosebumps to break out on my legs as I peered behind the dresser. It was subtle, but at the bottom of the wall, just above the baseboards, there was a stain. It was old and brown, but might have once been red. The stain ran down the walls in revolts, as if a thick liquid had splattered there and dribbled down. Scrunching my nose in disgust, I took a quick sniff. The same sourness that the house was notorious for filled my nostrils, but nothing else. I'm not sure what I was expecting, really. Like I said, the stain was old. It was probably nothing. With an aggravated huff, I shoved the dresser back in place and got on with my day. Later that day, I was in the living room with Lena, who was unusually quiet. My mom was complaining to my dad that we were out of groceries again, and that she was going to run to the store. She asked Lina if she wanted to join her, and to both me and my mom's surprise, Lina said no. Once my mom had gone, I asked my little sister what was up. "You always go with Mom. Is everything okay?" She shrugged, but didn't answer. "Hey, Lena," I pressed. "What's up? You can talk to me." She slowly looked at me and said, "This house is scary." Frowning, I asked her to elaborate. For a time, she considered how to explain. Finally, she said, "It feels like we aren't the only ones living here." I explained to her that this wasn't true, and that we just weren't used to living in such a large and old home. She didn't seem all that convinced, and why should she have? The place was damned creepy. The incessant creaking and moaning, the stink, the dogs always growling, Kai's awful imaginary friend, strange stains on the wall. Hell, even the way the neighbors always stared at us was weird. That night, I woke to one of our dogs sniffing my feet. This obnoxious new habit woke me up as often as the growling. I assumed it was to do with the smell of the fireplace. It probably clung to my feet as I walked around during the day. And the dogs are infamous for sniffing, licking, and even eating anything that smells funky. I pushed the dog back with my heel and grumbled, "Stop, go." The dog, which I assumed was Chiefy by the heavy footfalls, obeyed and left. I was halfway sunken back into sleep when Lena's shrill shriek sent my heart into my throat. I scrambled out of bed, terrified that my sister had badly hurt herself somehow. This wasn't a little scream. It was the type of scream that you told you something was really wrong. I was the first to enter her room, though. I could hear my parents bumping around down the hall. "Lina," I cried. "Are you okay?" She was sitting up on her bed, back against the wall. The blanket scrunched up to her eyes, and how bright those wide, petrified eyes were, even in the dark. Lina whimpered something unintelligible. I stepped closer, noticing that she wasn't really looking at me, but beyond me, at the corner of her room. She whispered, "Someone's behind you." I could hear my parents stumbling out from the room. They weren't here yet. I was petrified, nearly unable to move. Lina kept staring past me, her eyes glistening in the gloom. Slowly, I turned around. In the darkness that dominated that corner of the room, I thought I saw the figure of I'm not sure what. To this day, I'm not sure if I really saw anything or if I just imagined it. But I think it was a woman or a girl, wearing no clothes and bloodstained, faceless but for the shine of 2 piercing irises. I screamed. Lina joined me. My father snapped the light on as he stepped into Lina's room. The darkness was gone, and with it the figure. "What the hell happened?" he bellowed. In tandem, Lina and I pointed at the corner. My sister mumbled, There There was someone in the corner. I finished for her, my arm trembling, as unsure as I am in hindsight of what I saw. In that moment, I was not. I was mortified. As someone who had never believed in the supernatural, I found myself feeling it differently all at once. My father frowned at the corner, which was unoccupied. It was entirely normal, except I noticed it then. Old stains similar to those behind my dresser, low on the wall. By then, my mom had joined us, and the look she shared with my dad sent ice down my spine. Somehow, the expression on her face scared me more than even the thing I had maybe seen in the shadows. There's nothing, my dad announced after a moment. Tyson, dear, my mom said. My dad held up a hand, as if to say, don't. He turned back to my sister and I. Girls, it's normal to get spooked in a new house like this. Happens to your mother and me, too. But don't let it get to you. You hear? It's just an old house. It'll take some getting used to. He gestured at the dogs, who had hurried in at some point amid the confusion. Even these two get spooked here and there. It's normal. We spoke a little longer, until Lina and I had calmed down a little, then decided to go back to bed. Lina asked if she could sleep in my room. I said yes, more for myself than for her. She joined me on my bed and quickly drifted off, assured by her big sister's presence. I lay there for a while, wondering how it was that Kai hadn't woken from the earlier screaming. Then, just as I fell asleep, I thought I heard my brother in the other room, speaking to his imaginary friend. The next day, we all carried on as though nothing had happened the prior night. Though there was a tension in the way we moved through the house and spoke to each other, Lina was the worst of us in this regard. She spoke very little and, more concerningly, did not play or sing along to her K-pop soundtrack a single time. I was in the midst of mopping the floor. The dogs had gotten it dirt-stained again. When the false normalcy of the day broke, Kai approached my mother in the kitchen as she was chopping vegetables. My dad had just returned from the store with 2 bags of groceries and was orbiting my mom as he unloaded them. Kai softly said, "Mom?" "Yes, hon, what is it?" "Can we go back to our old house?" My dad ceased his motion, facing away but listening keenly. I did the same, pausing with the mop pushed halfway across the landing. Mom looked worriedly at Kai. "Why do you want to go back, sweetie?" I don't want to talk to him anymore," whispered Kai. A horror passed over my mother's features. It was the same expression that had shaken me the night before. My father placed his hands on the countertop, bowing his head and letting out a long, grisly sigh. "Shit," he muttered. "Tyson," my mom murmured. "We ought to discuss this with Ari at least. She's old enough. She's ought to have a say." I dropped the mop with a clatter and rushed into the kitchen. "Have a say about what?" I demanded. "Damn it," my dad said. "Kai, buddy, go watch a show with Lina, will you?" "But," Kai started. "I'll answer your question soon, bud, I promise. For now, go join Lina." Somberly, my little brother obeyed. A moment later, the raucous sound of SpongeBob SquarePants carried down the hall. I looked at my parents and crossed my arms. "Ari, love," my dad started. "We weren't totally honest with you when we first moved in." I frowned, waiting. My mom said, "The smell isn't the only reason why we were able to afford this house." She spoke as if the words hurt to say. "What other reason?" I asked impatiently. Dad sighed again. Something happened to the family who used to live here. Something awful." That image of the bloodstained girl in the corner flashed through my mind. I hugged myself, feeling the sting of tears at the back of my eyes. "I'll be blunt," my dad continued, "because there's no better way to say this. The family who last lived here, they died. They were killed. Right here in this house." I lifted a hand to my mouth. The tears were here now, their warmth running down my cheeks. "Tyson, tell her the whole thing," Mom insisted. "Damn it, fine." My dad looked me square in the eyes. The father of that family, he was the one who killed them. After which he committed S-word. I sank into one of the dining chairs, shaking. I thought of the brown stains on the wall, how they looked like they had been once crimson. And you bought this house anyway, I cried. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, dear, my mother said. Then she added, though perhaps it was a mistake. No, rebuked my father. There's nothing wrong with this house. It's a little creepy, a little creaky, but that's it. Living here's still a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that was the end of it. For the moment, at least, my dad refused to entertain the notion that our wonderful new home was haunted, and honestly, I wasn't quite there yet myself. Again, I'd never believed in that sort of thing, and the girl I thought I saw, I could have imagined it. My sister told me there was someone there. When you look into the dark, often you'll just see what you're expecting, or worse, what you're fearing. That doesn't make it real. So we carried on. Kai was told to ignore his imaginary friend. Lina needed a few days, but eventually she got back to her K-pop demon hunter's obsession. The dogs even settled down somewhat. Nothing else would happen for a while that suggested our house was haunted. And I tried my damnness not to dwell on the fact that a family had been murdered within my home's walls. At least I finally understood why the neighbors gawked at us so much. What sort of family would want to live here? They were surely thinking. The peace we maintained for a while was broken by my brother's crying one day. Despite Kai's age, he was not one to cry easily. So when I heard him weeping, I set my textbook and notes aside and went to check on him. I knocked gently and opened his door. He was sitting on the floor in the middle of his room with his legs crossed, crying into his palms. Hiya, Kai, I said, approaching him and kneeling. What's wrong? Did something happen? Kai's lower lip quivered as he spoke. He came back. My stomach sank. Who came back? My friend. He started, but hesitated. The scary man. I thought he was your friend, I asked, as confused as I was frightened. No. Kai whimpered. He's bad. I looked warily around the room. Swallowing, I asked my brother, where did you see this man? Handshaking, Kai pointed at our shared wall, and I quivered as I looked at it. It was much like my side. There was a small desk pushed up against the surface of wooden planks painted ivory white. A couple paintings hung onto it, and an air vent was built into its base. There was no brown staining that I could see here, though, mercifully. I sighed as I hugged my little brother. It'll be okay, I fumbled. Unsurprisingly, Kai did not seem assured. I tried again. Hey, do you want to sleep with me tonight? His eyes lit up. Really? Yes, really, I answered with a smile. I hadn't invited him into my room much in the past couple of years, and seeing how much it meant to him warmed me and made me feel a little bad. That night, he pranced into my room, pillow clutched in his arm. Close the door, I told him with a smirk, or Chiefy is going to be licking our feet tonight. We got cozy in bed and I read him a bit of his book he loved about a boy and a dragon. Once we were done with that, I asked him if he wanted to tell me anything about his former friend, the so-called scary man. He pouted and shook his head. Fair enough, I thought, regretting that I'd even asked. I shifted the subject to one of his favorite shows, earning back his precious smile. We spoke for a while about similar things that brought him comfort, and eventually, he dozed off. After tucking him in, and I got back to studying for another hour, and then turned off the bedside lamp and went to sleep. It was a few hours into the night when one of the dogs started sniffing my foot. I was mildly aware of that in this state of half sleep and tried to ignore it. Then the hound started licking, making it impossible to shrug off. Stop, I moaned, nearly letting out an involuntary giggle at the tickle of the tongue on my sole foot. Cut it out. Go. The dog listened, panting for a moment longer, then stepping away. I was starting to drift back to sleep when I remembered that I had asked Kai to close the door earlier, specifically so the dogs wouldn't get in. Abruptly, I sat up. My heart quickened as I turned to look at the door. It was closed. I swung off the bed, taking care not to wake Kai, and whispered, Chiefy? Miss Bear? Are you in here? There was no response. There was no dog. I stood in the middle of my room, heart hammering, unsure what to do or think. I lifted my foot and felt it. It was damp. But then I was sweating. Surely that's all it was. A little sweat on my foot. The sniffing and licking was a weird dream, that's all. I'm too old to be getting spooked like this, I told myself, frustrated. I got back into bed with a huff and tried to get back to sleep. It took some time, and as I lay there, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows past the foot of my bed. A bloodstained girl, perhaps? I'm too old for this, I repeated, exhausted and frustrated. Stop imagining things, Ari. I turned away and closed my eyes. The following days were normal, thankfully. Kai went back to sleeping in his room and didn't have any more visits from the scary man. I didn't have any more creepy foot dreams, and as for the apparitions I continued to see in the shadows of the house, well, once I smartened up and saw them for what they were, figments of my childish imagination, they bothered me less. Life carried on. A few normal days turned to weeks. In the surety of that routine, I couldn't have known that the worst of my family's ordeal was yet to come. I couldn't have fathomed just how dark this home's secrets truly were. The turning point arrived during one of my daily walks. Chiefy and Miss Bear were pulling on their leashes like usual, propelling me down the street, when I caught one of the neighbors staring at me. He was out by his mailbox, closer than I'd ever caught any of them. They usually stared from their windows and porches. The calm weeks had made me confident in my family's choice to purchase the house, and so I let my anger get the better of me as I glared back at this man. "Excuse me, sir," I called. He glanced at me the way a child would look at a ghost. "Yes? You and others in your home are always staring at us. It's rude and exhausting. What is your deal?" He fidgeted with the letters he'd drawn from the mailbox. Well, he mumbled. Then, after a moment, he looked up, seeming to gather his resolve. "Call it rude, but we can't help but wonder what sort of folks would want to buy a house like that." The dogs were restless. "Sit," I commanded. "Sit and stay." As I met the man's gaze again, I said, "What sort of folks, you ask?" "The sort who aren't taken by superstition." I smiled inwardly, pleased with my delivery. The man made a face halfway between a frown and a grimace. "Superstition," he managed. "You do know what happened in that house, right?" I tilted my chin up and answered without hesitation. "The father killed his family. Horrible, no doubt about it, but not any reason to pass up on a once-in-a-lifetime deal, unless you're superstitious, that is." "The father?" whispered the man. His eyes widened and he looked over my shoulder at the house. "What?" I demanded. "You don't know?" he said under his breath, his worried gaze falling back onto me. "I don't know what?" Chiefy pushed his head into my leg. Miss Bear whined a little. The man explained. "There was a lot of confusion when that horrible thing happened to the family who lived there. The official reports claimed the whole family had died because that was the convenient conclusion for the investigators, but that was only a rotten bit of negligence and cowardice." He swallowed. "The truth is that the wife and the 2 children were butchered, and the father was never found." Thoughts laced in fear raced through my mind. My dogs continued to whine. "Bastard got away," continued the man. "No one knows where he went. All of us around here upped our security after, you can bet on that. Reinforced windows and doors, alarm systems, cameras, the whole suit. And then comes along a seemingly nice little family, eager to move into that godforsaken place. Imagine our shock." He shook his head. "Call it rude, miss, but you can't quite blame us for gawking, can you?" I licked my lips, which stung with dryness. Where did he go?" The man shrugged. "Like I said, no one knows." Then he looked around as though he was expecting an ambush. Leaning closer, he whispered, "Sometimes, though, our cameras catch footage of what looks like a ragged man ambling around the shrouded dark of the neighborhood." "You've shown this to the police?" I asked. "Of course, we've done all we can to get the investigation reopened. It was a terrible thing those investigators did, but all our efforts fell on deaf ears." I glanced over my shoulder at the house. My parents had gone out for groceries again. Kai and Lina were home alone. I have to go," I cried and started running back home. Was the man lying? Were my parents the ones lying? I tried to make sense of it as I ran back, and slowly, in the depths of my intuition, a suspicion began to form. I burst through the front door, calling out for my siblings. They appeared a moment later, confused and a little scared. "Stay with me," I told them. "Stay close." I led them up to Kai's room and asked him to show me where the scary man had been. As he lifted his arm to point, nausea swept over me. He wasn't pointing at the wall. He was pointing at the vent. I should have called the police right then and taken my siblings over to the neighbor's place, but a delirious need to know took hold of me without me having much say in it. I lurched towards the vent and grabbed it by the sides. I pushed and pulled. It didn't budge. I pushed harder. Suddenly, a groan passed through the wall and the vent gave way. No, not only the vent. A square section of the wall went inward, about 3 feet wide and tall, with the vent at its base. Cobwebs and dust puffed out. What I thought was a solid wall separating my room and my brother's turned out to be a gap wide enough for someone to squeeze through. A sour reek wafted from the place. "Stay here," I told my siblings, and in my delirium, I crawled through the opening. Lina and Kai protested, but I waved them off. I shimmied along the space until I was behind the vent leading into my own room. I pushed hard, and as I expected, the wall gave way. Another crudely cut square opened to my room. Peering out from there, the first thing I saw was the foot of my bed, and I imagined my feet poking out from the edge as I slept. A sighing sound carried from the far end of the crawl space. I froze in place, listening. The sign was mixed with a sort of humming. Huh, it wet. Huh. It grew louder, a slow, rolling noise. Huh. Feeling as though my heart would burst from my chest, I slowly twisted my head. It was awfully dark at the far end of the gap. I squinted into the shadows until I could make out a solid vertical line in the dark, the end of the wall. A corner where the crawl space turned and continued out of view. The sound became more excited. Huh. I leaned forward a bit, just a bit, narrowing my eyes, trying to make sense of what I saw. Half a face, peeking out from the corner. One bloodshot eye, pallid, withered skin, a twisting, unnatural grin of rotten teeth, a scraggly, bony hand clutching the wall. The creature that might have been a man started to laugh again. Ho ho! I screeched as I threw myself back into Kai's room. It was such a scream that my throat would hurt for days to come. I grabbed my siblings' hands and ran downstairs. The ugly walls and furnishings of the house passed me by in a blur. That horrible laughing chased us all the way, and I swear I heard scurrying footsteps in our wake. We burst outside and ran straight to the neighbors. No creature followed us there that I could see. With the neighbor's phone, I called the police and then my parents. Within 20 minutes, our lane was crammed with emergency vehicles, dozens of lights flashing in the late afternoon dim. "We didn't know, Ari, I swear," insisted my father. "The realtor told us they all died." My family and I were standing huddled by our car, waiting anxiously as the authorities searched our house. "Well, they didn't," I snapped back. "I saw him." My mother covered her face with her hands. My father shook his head, cursing to himself. Sometime later, one of the policemen approached us wearing a grim expression. "Whoever your daughter saw," he said to my parents, "is gone. The house is empty. That said, your daughter definitely did see someone." My mom wailed. My dad just stared. "Follow me," the policeman said. "You'll want to see this." Mom stayed with the kids while my dad and I went back into the house. The cop led us into an opening on the main floor, much like the ones I discovered upstairs. The passages on the floor grew wider, danker, moist dirt, at least I hope it was dirt, squelched underfoot. And I finally understood why our floors were always so muddy. The spaces between the walls eventually led to a cave of sorts, dug out of earth below the house. There were used up cans of soup, beans, and soda, and rotting bits of meat and fruit laying all about the place. With that, I finally understood why our groceries were so quick to run out. And the sour reek. It reached its pinnacle here in this atrocity of a den hidden beneath my house. The father who had slain his family had not died. He had lived on, here in this cave, leeching off of and tormenting my family. I thought about everything my family and I had experienced leading up to that moment and shuddered, nearly vomiting right there. We moved out immediately. Not only to a new house, but a new city. We have reinforced windows and doors in our new place. And we watch anyone who passes by our house the same way our former neighbors used to look at us. But it's not enough, because the man who had haunted us was never found. he is still on the loose today. The 5 of us live as though we're waiting for that thing to reappear. We try to lead a normal life, but Kai continues to imagine the return of his imaginary friend. My mother checks our pantry and fridge daily, often freaking out, thinking we're running out of food faster than we should. My dad loses it anytime he spots even a bit of dirt on the floor, and I wake up in the middle of the night at least 3 times a week with that awful sense that something has been licking my feet. I tricked mentally ill and poor people into doing degrading stuff on camera. Exactly as the title says. A couple of years ago, I was heavily into booger sugar, so my friends and I would stay up all night just talking to each other in my apartment for many nights in a row. Most people who have done a lot of drugs know that playing video games and watching movies is really not that fun to do while doing lines all night. So we started doing a lot of weird things, like this instead. One night, for some reason, we started messing with this mentally ill guy who we went to school with on Facebook, who thinks he died when he crashed his car on drugs a couple of years back and got a major psychosis from the incident. The guy now fully believes he is dead and makes these weird Facebook rants, telling people he is seen and talking to angels and demons and that he is dead. One night, we call up the guy, posing as a local newspaper that wants to write an article about him. He and my friend had the strangest conversation ever. He kept the conversation going for almost 2 hours, while I recorded for the whole thing as an MP3 on my phone. The next day, I presented the clip to all of my friends who were totally ecstatic, and we all think it's the funniest thing we've ever heard. We start messing with this guy almost every night after work, writing him as God, making him record weird songs from heaven and hell, making him take weird photos of himself, etc. But after a week of shenanigans, his caretaker or whoever makes him delete his Facebook account because the rants online are getting out of control. After realizing that messing with this guy was funny as shit, but that we could no longer do it, we started looking for new victims. First, we start trolling our local high school's Facebook group, posing as this pair of effed up parents, but are eventually found out and kicked out. Then we start trolling the local vegans selling horse meat and other stuff, but eventually they make the group private and only members they know personally can join. After that, we start trolling all sorts of local groups on Facebook. To join these local groups, you have to have an account that looks somewhat believable. So we would go on these religious boards and make posts praising God. That shit gets a lot of activity. And just start adding people until we had a ton of friends and the account would look somewhat real. The people most active on these religious boards are people from places in Africa that are very poor. And these people are willing to do anything for a couple of bucks. So we will start calling up random strangers that look like they are willing to do anything for money, sending them a bit of cash via Western Union to make them try and do backflips while I record it. That crazy part is that once you send that first dollar, they know that there's more where it's coming from, and you now have your own personal gesture overseas, and they will do literally anything as long as you send them that first bit of cash. So then it became almost like a new addiction for me. I was promising these poor people a big cash prize. Of course, there was no prize if they did what I told them to do on the webcam so I could record it. The most effed up part is that I enjoyed doing it and found it hilarious. I used to only do it with friends so we all could laugh at it together. But later, I often just sat alone, calling/writing these poor people and making them do weird and degrading stuff on webcam. Jeez, man. And now let's get into some top comments. Someone says, "This is definitely a confession. Yikes." And yeah, this is horrible. I'm gonna bump this with a personal story for all of you. I had just graduated and, like most college students, had no money or job. Me and a few of my friends decided to go in on a shitty apartment together just until we get on our feet. Find this great 3-bedroom for cheap, but the landlord was extremely suspicious. No contract was ever signed, just required money up front every month. The apartment itself was nice, but very old, like something out of the 1920s. Except for this one massive part of the hallway closet that looked like it was recently plastered over. Just an awkward white spot that nobody tried to hide or paint over. We asked the landlord about it, and he said it was from recent renovations. We knew this was complete bullshit, but we were desperate and the place was cheap. Cut to a month later. We're all settled in and doing fine. One night we're watching TV when there's a knock at the door. Two massive Russians are standing at our doorstep. I mean, like 6 foot tall, prison muscle jack guys. One was wearing a sailor hat and tank top, which looked tremendously gay, but at this point, none of us were laughing. They asked about some guys, saying they owed them money. We tell them that we have been living there for a month, and that we don't know the men they are looking for. The Russians get visibly confused, but don't push the issue much farther. Instead, they get in their car and just sit there watching our apartment for several hours. Now, this apartment was in a super bad neighborhood. We're talking boarded up houses, drug dens, drive-by shooting kind of bad, so nobody cared or took notice of some suspicious guys sitting in their cars for hours like us. Eventually, we all got freaked out enough to call the cops. And then the OP says, "We'll continue if anyone's interested." And then someone comments, "I'm interested. How was the landlord suspicious? And how did he know what they said about the wall is bullshit? Also, friendly reminder that if you have a story to tell, please finish it. It can't be worse than most of Vex if you tried." And then the OP replied to this comment saying, "The landlord was suspicious because he didn't make us sign a lease or contract or anything. Just wanted the money up front. Also, he said that plastered hole was from renovations, when clearly nothing else in the apartment looked new or renovated." Okay, this is taking longer to type out than expected, so 2 out of blank? Of course, once the single cop showed up, the Russians flew off. We explained to them what happened, but he said there wasn't much he could do other than tell officers to keep a lookout for the car. The whole time we were talking, he kept looking around the apartment nervously. And finally, right before he left, he asked us, "Do you guys live here by choice?" We were a little freaked out by the question, but told him we were just college kids looking for someplace cheap. He asked if we knew the story behind this place, and when we answered no, he told us what he knew. Apparently, a bunch of illegal immigrants had been living in this apartment previously, but had all been deported. Somehow, they had gotten wondering that the immigration police were coming mere minutes before they came. One of them had somehow managed to get into the spaces behind the walls and hide there for several hours as the police searched the place. The police made the hole in the closet trying to get to him, but he had escaped and was still at large. Of course, after telling us that horrific story, the cop left and we pretty much stayed up all night afraid of a bunch of Russians were going to murder us. Next month, we confronted our landlord, saying we knew about the illegals and he begged us not to move out. We were probably the first tenants in years that had paid rent on time and in full each month. Anyways, none of us had any other options at the time, so we were kind of stuck anyway, so we stayed. Next post is when things started getting batshit crazy. Another couple of weeks passed and neither of us had seen the Russians again, so we were starting to feel more relaxed again, except for one of my roommate's girlfriend. She didn't live there, but stayed with us several times a week. One morning, she asked if we had heard shuffling and scratching at night. We were all heavy sleepers, so we just wrote it off as typical odd noises in an old place. Only a few nights later, I had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. When I finally awoke to head to my own bed, I also heard the scratching. It sounded like a fucking rats burrowing in our walls and ceilings. There would be several seconds of furious scratching, and then what sounded like pieces of wood or debris falling or settling. The next day, I told my roommates, and that night we all stayed up together and heard the scratching skittering once again. We all concluded that it was rats and called the landlord to hire an exterminator. The asshole took several weeks to follow through, so for the time being, we just ignored the scratches, seeing as they only happened at night, and most of us could sleep through it anyway. That, and none of us had actually seen any rats. Another night, we were all sleeping peacefully when a loud boom woke us all up suddenly. It sounded like someone had dropped a fucking anvil on our ceiling. It was that loud. We all searched the place, but there was no cracks or broken items or any signs of damage whatsoever, so we just ignored it and went back to bed. Anyone still here? After the big boom, we went almost 2 weeks without any incident. But during that time, the apartment started smelling terrible. At first, we just thought it was us. I mean, you had 3 guys living in one place. Of course, it's a little rank, right? We even spent 1 full day cleaning and washing everything, but the smell kept getting worse. It got to the point where walking into the apartment was like walking into a public restroom where someone had taken a dump and let it sit all day. At this point, we just harassed our landlord with endless phone calls until he came himself. Upon entering our place, he almost puked. Finally, the next day, an exterminator came. The scratches had stopped, but one of my roommates made a video of it with his cell phone to show the guy. He said it sounded like rats or possibly a possum, but said that usually they don't stink up a place as bad as ours. Now, we lived on the top floor of this apartment, and the exterminator wondered if we had access to the attic. We told him no, and that we had never ever been up there because the only way to get in was a tiny square door in the ceiling of our hallway that was always locked. The exterminator said he would get access to it from the landlord and return in a few days. Next day, I came home from work early, and to my surprise, I see those 2 fucking Russians waiting in their car again. I was really starting to get sick of all the crazy shit going on in the apartment, so I got my courage up and went right up to their window and knocked. They rolled the window down and asked why they kept watching us. They said they knew I was lying about their friend. I screamed that I don't know the guy who owed them money and said if they didn't leave us alone, I'd call the cops. In hindsight, I was probably really lucky they didn't shoot me or something, but the driver did give me a stern, pant-shitting glare before driving off again. He only said 2 things. "I saw climb up to your apartment. We'll be back for our money." Suffice it to say, I freaked the fuck out and told both my roommates. For the next 48 hours, we acted like morons. One of us staying up to watch in shifts at night for safety. Finally, the exterminator came back with a key to the attic. We were all very on edge, so it didn't help when the exterminator looked into the attic for not even a minute before climbing back down and telling us to leave immediately and call the police. We did so, and only when the police came did the exterminator finally say what he'd seen. As you've probably guessed by now, the missing Russian had died in our attic, which was where the smell came from. Apparently, he had been living there for a while and using some makeshift tunnel in the spaces behind the walls to get in and out without us noticing. We never got the final word on how exactly he died, but I did learn it was slow and painful. The thing that still really sticks with me is why he never cried for help. He knew we were right there under him, but instead of seeking help, he just laid there, dying. Obviously, we had all had enough after that and moved out within the next week. Our landlord actually got arrested, but we never really found out what for. And then the final update to this post. The day I was moving all my stuff out, I noticed the police had left the attic door unlocked and I wanted to go up and see this place for myself during the day. It was very eerie. The space was tiny and cramped, barely enough room to walk crouched down. You could see the insulation on the walls. The bed was nothing more than a ratty sleeping bag, and the only source of light were a couple of flashlights. Wrappers and empty cans of food were just littered everywhere, along with plastic drink bottles. A garbage bag was filled with some dirty clothes, and it looked like the cops had taken or confiscated anything else up there. The most fucked up thing, though, were the little tiny holes drilled in the floor. There were 3 spread out across the space. When I bent down to look, you could see our living room, kitchen, and bathroom pretty clearly. I don't know if the holes were just up there so he could make sure we were asleep or if he was just actively watching us. Next to one hole was a clawed up section of the floor with some blood, like he was just scratching with his fingernails nonstop. I feel terrified thinking that he was dying and couldn't speak for some reason, and maybe his scratching was a call for help. I'll never know, but it had really fucked me up to this day. The only paranormal part of this story was the last night I spent there. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, but in my way back, heard that familiar scratching in the walls. I left immediately, spent the night in a motel, and only came back during the day for my stuff. I've never gone back to that area since. And wow, super interesting and weird story. I mean, what do you think